Welcome, everyone, to the What Comes First podcast. I'm your host, Keith Canner, and we are grateful today for Raul Alvarez joining us. And literally, as I was thinking about this, he's kind of a podcaster's worst nightmare because his bio is so long, I could literally just sit here and read it for the entire show. So I'm going to really shrink it down, Raul, and you can correct me whatever I miss. So Raul was born in Cuba, and at the age of 5, he and his family immigrated into our country as they fled communist rule. He's a very proud graduate of the University of Miami, 1976. And after graduating Miami, he held numerous leadership positions across the globe with Wendy's and Burger King up until 1994 when he joined McDonald's. And eventually, he ascended to the role of COO and president of the McDonald's Corporation. And yes, the entire thing. He is actively serving or has served on boards of Traeger Grill, First Watch Restaurant Group, where I ate this morning, by the way, Raul, Lowe's, Eli Lilly, and Dunkin' Brands. Raul is married to his wife, Gloria. They have 2 children, and they spend their time back and forth between Florida and California. So welcome to the show, Raul.
Thank you, Keith. Very much appreciated, and look forward to talking with you here.
Yeah, I know I skipped a bunch there, but did I do okay on the introduction?
No, that's good. That's good.
I mean, I didn't even cover your stint with Skylark in Japan, where you led the largest restaurant chain in Japan, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct.
Yeah.
That was after my retirement from McDonald's a couple of years later. One of the private equity groups, Bain Capital, had bought this business that was failing. 50-year-old business, 3,500 restaurants, 100,000 employees, just in Japan and Taiwan. And so about 5-6 months in, they asked me to come and take a look and help them out, just consulting. Of course, that turned into more than that. So I ended up taking a role of executive chairman. And so I spent, about half my time over a 6-year period. So going back every month, spending a couple of weeks at a time there. But it was, I love Japan from my times in McDonald's. I spent a lot of time there, really like the people, love the country. And so it was an adventure. And we did really good work, took the company, did an IPO, and then sold out over that period of time, almost 6 years. And it continues to thrive, and it's doing well.
See, you are a podcaster's worst nightmare because I didn't even get to that in the bio, and we could spend the whole time just talking about that period. So you make it really hard because of your breadth of experience. But, as I thought about where we would start, we really have to start in your youth because it's such a pivotal time for you, given what your parents sacrificed and what they went through. So if you could just take us back. So, because, I want people to know your story because it's really compelling. I think people can get a lot out of it. Tell us about your journey here as an immigrant into the United States and what was going on, and just kind of tell us that story, if you would.
Sure. Yeah. We're a small family. It's just my brother and I. He's a couple of years older. And so my dad had actually been president of Cubana Airways in Cuba, and he had to flee the country because Castro was starting to, he'd just show up and take leaders away so that he could control those companies that were, it was a government entity. And so he fled the country before we did in July of 1960. And then we came 4 months later. So my mom and my brother and I, and on a midnight flight on Pan Am Airways, because they were watching her. It's kind of what they did, intimidation, and came to the U.S. We were fortunate. My mom was bilingual. My mom's a scientist, a marine biologist. And so a couple of months after being in the U.S., she got hired by the University of Miami as a research professor. And, we didn't suffer the economic consequences. It was more the emotional consequences that other families went through. But my mom's a rock. My dad unfortunately had a major stroke a year later. He lived another 40 years, but never really recovered completely. And so mom was kind of mom and dad. And worked at the University of Miami for 15 years there, and basically she put us in school right away. She knew this Castro thing was for the long run and said, you got to learn English. That's priority number one. So we went to school. We were the only two Spanish speaking kids. And when you're young, you learn the language pretty fast when you have to survive. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, did it help at all? I mean, I was thinking just on the surface when I was doing my prep that settling in Miami might have been a little easier than settling in Nashville in the 60s, but it doesn't sound like it was too easy, because if you were the only two Spanish speaking kids in school, it definitely was a big adjustment.
Right. It helped, like, I would say 18, 24 months later, when the situation got tougher in Cuba and people really started leaving. We left early because of my dad's situation, but the freedom flights that President Kennedy set up started in 1962. In fact, my wife came on one of those. She's also Cuban. And so it did help, but I would say the first year or so. But when you're a kid, you just don't know. You get to school, you make friends. The park is your babysitter because both your parents are working, and so pretty quickly you assimilate, and I think that was a benefit. Harder for those folks that I know that came as teenagers or early 20s, for sure.
Yeah, I was thinking as you were telling the story, being 5, probably not as hard as being older, but definitely for your parents. What a sacrifice, for your dad. I mean, he's running he ran an airlines, and then the next thing you know, he's leaving for the betterment of his family. And then you were describing your mom's relationship like she was the rock. And wow, what admiration you must have for your parents for creating and giving you the opportunity that you and your brother have had.
Yeah, for sure. And my mom, education was everything, and so she pushed us both hard. I would say my brother harder. The oldest son always gets that. And, I'm a business person. He's a scientist. So he followed in her footsteps. He's a theoretical physicist, and don't know what that means, but that's what he does. and actually teaches at the University of Miami now. And
that is awesome.
One thing about him, which is interesting, he went to Princeton undergrad, graduated valedictorian in 3 years. So he was for sure the first Hispanic valedictorian at Princeton, and continued PhD Harvard, ran the physics department at Berkeley. And so a lot of times I say, I was a hamburger salesman. He's the real accomplished person in the family.
That's unbelievable. I did get the pleasure of meeting your brother, and super nice guy. So I told Dan he could have a few questions. So this could get dangerous. He wanted me to ask you, when you were a kid, how did you pick the players on your basketball team, and what did that teach you in business?
Yeah, you're in the park, right? There's only, the park that I played in, there's only one hoop. And so you pick the players that are going to help you win, or you don't get to play. So you don't pick your friends, you don't pick, someone you like. No, you pick the best players that help you win, and you figure out how to win. And I've always, that for me has always been something I believed in business that you have to do. And you pick the talent and then mold that talent so that they work together and you have one cohesive team going forward.
So it's interesting what you explained to me. What it sounds like is complete meritocracy, right? To win, you pick the best person regardless of race, girl, boy, like gender. It doesn't matter. Like, we're going to pick whoever the best person is. Doesn't matter if you know them, like them. Right. That's the way to win.
That's right. And of course, then you got to work as a team, right? Basketball, we know that, 5 players, we see a lot of individual great talent that never win championships because, they can't work together. So that piece has to come together. That's part of the game.
Yeah. And I was going to ask this question a little later, but I think it dovetails in really nicely here, because Dan wanted me to ask you also, like, about the immigrant mentality and what like you had to overcome a lot of things. And what's disappointing, I don't want to get off on a like kind of a political thing here, but you diversity is important, right? Because there's so many talented people that maybe not get opportunities based on whatever the reason, right? And that's what we're talking about is no matter what, pick the best person and talk about that mentality, because obviously you probably hit roadblocks in your career, maybe based on where you are from, or you didn't fit into the right club, or this, that, the other, but you were able to overcome those, obviously, and have a wildly successful career. So talk a little bit about that and how you just kind of push through that.
Yeah, I think there were more roadblocks back then, I believe, than today. I think the country's in a much better place in providing opportunity, no matter whether race, gender, etc. Uh, Part of what I did is I took risk. And so early on in my career, you know, I first was at a CPA firm, one of the big accounting firms, but I went to Burger King. And my first big job was I moved to Spain. I was 27
Wow.
years old, general manager running a $30 million business. It was the largest chain in Spain because Spain had just come out of a dictatorship and, finally allowed investments into the country like 5, 6 years earlier.
Hmm.
But it's a job that everybody said, don't take it. It's a guaranteed failure. You're out there on your own. And my thought was, one, I speak Spanish, so I've got one piece that helps there. It's intriguing. Have no fear when you're young. You have a lot less fears, and go and prove yourself for opportunities that other people wouldn't take. And
Hmm.
so that was my way of dealing with what I perceived would have been some of the roadblocks. And so I did a lot of international, and I thought, at least for my career, that was really, really helpful.
Yeah.
I also ran the Burger King Canada business as president. I ran Europe for them. That was all in my first, 10 years in the restaurant business was, and I always tell young folks is when you don't have, I had a young family, but you don't have all the debts and all the, take those risks then. You can
Right.
stumble and get back up and keep on running. And so
Hmm.
that was my belief, and I think that served me well.
That is so good. Did I know obviously some of those things, principles and things you learned from your parents, but I know the University of Miami's been very formidable on you when you were going there, obviously, and then you've stayed connected with the university. Like, what were the most important things that you learned out of the university that you took into your business world?
Yeah, so university was important because that's where my mom went to work. That
Hmm.
they gave us, as a family, the opportunity. Uh, my mom was a 33-year-old scientist that, they allowed her to go into the Marine School, was a very important part of the University of Miami. And so we grew up with that. I didn't have a choice where I was going to go, which turned out great because my parents were paying for my brother to go to an Ivy League school, couldn't afford number two to go somewhere else because in Miami was free. I had free tuition because she worked there. And so, but I grew up going to the football games and everything else. And when I got to Miami, I was on a mission just to learn as much as I could, and then get out and in the world working.
Hmm.
So I was a commuter student because we lived there, so I didn't have some of the other benefits, but I always stayed close to the University of Miami, and my son ended up graduating from there also, and now my brother teaches there, so it's a pretty long history with the university, and I stay involved. I love, you know, the business school does a program they call executive in residence, where you come and spend a day, teach 4 or 5 classes, and then you get to have dinner with the top students of the business school. And that's one of my favorite days of the year when I do that. I haven't done it in a couple of years here, but you get a chance to see the young talent. And what it tells me after I meet those kids, it's country's going to be okay.
Yeah.
Right? You see young people with that level of energy, a lot brighter, than we are. With today's tools, it's impressive and it's always energizing.
Yeah, occasionally I'll get to go over to Middle Tennessee State University, which is right down the road here in Murfreesboro, and I'll either lead a class or I'll get to be around the kids, and I leave with a lot of energy. It's like you say, you're like, wow, there's some really. You hear all the negative stuff on the news, but then you go and you say, there's some bright kids here, and we've got a good future ahead of us.
So I'll tell you one thing they
Yeah.
always ask me
Okay.
is, what would you do differently if you were us right now?
Mm-hmm.
I always get that question, in one way or another.
All
And I
right.
always tell them, I would have taken every psychology class I could have, not just the two required ones, because I spent my whole career figuring out how to motivate employees or how to motivate customers.
Mm-hmm.
And so understanding, you know, you know, different people and different things and how they tick and what's going to make them, whether it's pick a bank, buy a mortgage, or
Mm-hmm.
decide where they're going for dinner. A lot of that has to do with psychology, and so that's what I always say is, you may be in business school or whatever it is, but people eventually is what makes things happen, and knowing how to work with them is the most important thing.
Yeah, I've often said I got out of the mortgage business a long time ago. I'm in the people business, right? Like, because I
Hmm.
mean, mortgages are kind of a commodity and they're important and we need to know how to do them. But ultimately, it's getting these teams aligned and delivering your product out to the consumer, which is really important. And so that's a great segue into your professional career. And I know that you've worked for public companies and they're not notorious for a lot of patience. And you were obviously involved in a lot of high change environments back even obviously well before the pandemic. But it feels like as we've gone through the pandemic and now we're in kind of, I don't know, they say post pandemic, and things are moving really fast, right? Interest rates have really risen. You see the effects now on the banks. Tech companies have gotten hit pretty hard. Obviously, the mortgage industry has struggled. Companies that were really had access to not free money, but really low cost funds have really struggled. My question is, you've been in high change environments all your life, and now that it feels like maybe it's here to stay and we're in these high change environments, what advice would you give about either leading or adapting to the environments we find ourselves in today? Because I think they are high paced.
Yeah, I think one is you have to take care of the business fundamentals of whatever business you're in, right? There's, when you have easy access to cash, when the consumer spending without a lot of concern, uh, the tide rises for everyone. Now we're in choppy waters, and the good captains are going to win, through those waters. And so I believe the fundamentals were First Watch Restaurants, which I'm chairman of, got a philosophy which is people first. And so in the restaurant business here, the last 3 years, it was really hard to hire and retain talent. But the fact that we always took care of our employees, that was a priority, that we empower them to make decisions. And if your food's not right, they don't have to go check with the manager. They comp you for it or fix it or whatever they have to. All the things that you would expect as an adult when you're working, that you can make your own decisions. We've been able to get back staffed with great talent and great people, and we're thriving. And so I think the fundamentals, whatever that is, the same way on the balance sheet of businesses, right? If you got a little lazy with your balance sheet, you're paying the price. And
Mm-hmm.
so, keeping in, kind of daily cash flows and what's going on, and do you have your debts spaced out over time so they don't all get called at a certain time and now maybe you can't refinance, et cetera. Those fundamentals, that's what I would spend my time on right now, to
Mm.
because we'll have good times again. You just need to make sure your foundation's solid so you can get there.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about your journey at McDonald's and, the turnaround that took place. Dan had mentioned to me the 5 Ps. What was that at McDonald's? How you had success there?
So, so I went to McDonald's in '94.
Mhm.
So I was running the Southeast for Wendy's. Uh, and Wendy's I was doing well. Things were going excellent, and I had tried to join McDonald's because they were the kind of the big dog in the industry twice before, but they didn't hire from the outside,
Mm.
and but they came calling, and they recruited me. I actually took a slight pay cut. My wife thought I was nuts. We moved to California, which was a bigger pay cut, and I was living in Florida, and so. But to me, it was okay. I want to play. I want to play with the big boys, and I think I'm good at this business. But I really want to know if I'm really as good as I think I am, and work, in the most competitive with the most competitive company. And they were the leader in international by far.
Mm.
And so that's really why they came after me, because they wanted my international experience as they kept on growing that part of the business. That's where they were making more than half their profits already
Mhm.
back then in '94. And so we moved to California. I ran out of Sacramento, what's called Northern California, piece of the business. And I was there, uh, ran that for 3 to 4 years. They put me there on purpose. It was in the bottom of 22 regions. It was, bottom of the pack. And it was like, okay, it kind of like sink or
Right.
swim. Uh, and I've used that philosophy before, no fear, calculated risks. If you make mistakes, don't be afraid to admit them, and correct them fast. And so we took that little region, moved from last to second and then first in the 2 to 3 year period. And it was, again, honestly, it was just working on fundamentals,
Mm.
right people in the right space, in the right spot, and taking care of the customer. Uh, this business, the restaurant business, especially the quick service restaurant business, you get feedback every day, right? You have
Mhm.
1,500 customers a restaurant. So, if you talk to your customers, you're going to know what you're doing well or you're not, and you can make changes if you're willing, to be flexible. And so, I've always believed that, and I've seen it in my career, that you can make a difference pretty fast. Uh, Different if you're in a business where, you know you're selling homes, right? People, the buying cycle's 8 years. It's not 3 days,
Mhm.
and so it's hard to make that impression again. Uh, you know, Pretty easy in the restaurant business if you're willing to do that. And so I did that. I finally got to a point. We had moved around a lot, and so I was pretty much done with the work there. And but I couldn't move for another couple of years because my son was finishing high school, and the poor kids had, I
Yeah.
packed, moved them internationally everywhere. And I said, for high school, both my kids did their high school there in California.
That's great.
And actually I went, and this is again one of those things you do, risk, learn. I went. McDonald's had bought Chipotle
Mm.
at 12 restaurants at the time, so it was nothing. And they basically said, "We'll give you California, build it, go pick the real estate, hire the management team, set up the supply chain, you know, build it up to 30 to 50 restaurants. If we can make it work in California, where there's a lot of competition in that category, then the kind of gourmet burrito type category, there's a lot of local chains that were pretty strong. We can make it there, then we're going to grow this thing fast nationally." And
Mhm.
so I did that for 2 years. A lot of fun. Worked out of my house. Kind of the first remote work type scenario.
Mhm.
No office. Did my own real estate work. Hired my own attorneys. And but again, it's you take a little risk. That was a great experience. I knew that brand was going to really succeed because the fundamentals that the founder had put in place were amazing. And so again, that's part of what I look at as the adventures that you take on have to be challenging in order for them to be rewarding.
So if I'm getting a theme through here, I mean, it seems like calculated risk. I mean, ever since you were 5, I mean, your parents took the risk. and all throughout your life, you've just kind of gone out by faith, if you will, and taken some risk, and it's paid off.
Right. Yeah, and I believe in that. And after that, for
Oh.
example, I went to Mexico City. I ran McDonald's Mexico. People's like, "Oh, it's not safe to live there." Yeah, we had a great time.
Uh-huh.
And it's unfortunate we weren't there long enough. We were there, less than 2 years, and then I got picked up to come back and run a bigger part of the U.S. business. But it's again, I felt like I was back when I went there. I was back like when I was in Spain.
Mm-hmm.
Where you're in a country that's trying to, that's got economic issues, but trying to do better. And
Mm-hmm.
on when people would go eat at a McDonald's, it was really a treat for the family. And and so that was really, really rewarding also, for that reason. And the employees were just amazing. They were just happy to have a job and worked unbelievably hard. So we've been back 3 times since I left there for weddings of, young guys that I worked with there who
Oh,
got
that's
married
cool.
later on.
That's really neat. That's really neat. Okay, take us to that day when you get the COO and president position at McDonald's. I mean, that's like one of the top brands in the world. That's one of the top companies in the world. You've gone from 5 years old entering our country to, I mean, like, this is a real big deal. Did it sink in, or is this just, it was just another like step and like talking? That's like incredible, Raul.
Yeah, I would say the one that really was what I thought was the biggest move was, here I am in Mexico running 300 restaurants. I get
Mm-hmm.
I get brought to the U.S. They reorganized the U.S. The business was not doing well. Used to have 5 divisions, uh, put it down to 3 divisions, 15,000 restaurants. So each division had 5,000 restaurants. And so uh, going to 5,000 restaurants, that to me was my biggest challenge
Mm.
because every other business I had was, I'll say, small enough that I knew every leader on every team, and he almost eventually by traveling knew every restaurant manager, right? So you were close. You could get by the it's not the power, but the power of influence, right?
Mm-hmm.
Personal influence there, telling a story, leading. Now you had to get it done through technology, mass media, speeches, things that I had not done before.
Right.
Uh, and so what I quickly realized in those first 3-4 months is now it's about the right systems and the very clear direction, so that it when it and that it figure out ways it doesn't get filtered down through the hierarchy of the company. That was to me the biggest challenge
Mm-hmm.
there, and but while still keeping that nimbleness and no fear type mentality that you need if you're trying to create a turnaround in a business.
Yeah.
And so that
Yes.
to me was the biggest challenge. And honestly, within a year, I was made COO of the U.S. business, and then within a year, I was president of the U.S. business. And so, but my learning really were when I went from that 300 to 400 restaurants to 5,000, and now you really got to get things done through the power of influence, not the power of direct touch communication, etc.
Yeah. I think anytime a business grows, in any scale, right? Like as it starts to get bigger, you're not able to touch those key people, and that's well said. So the business needed a little bit of well, maybe a big turnaround. Talk about the principles and the fundamentals of what it took to turn it around.
Yeah, honestly, it was pretty obvious what wasn't right. We had all the data in the world. It's
Hmm.
a big company. We had all the consumer data, et cetera. Just change is hard when you're changing decisions that you made yourself.
Hmm.
So I had a little bit of a benefit there because I was the outsider. I was always the outsider because everybody else was homegrown. And not having a vested interest in, whatever decision was made. If it's not working now, it may have been a right decision then, but the environment has changed, and so and not taking time to overstudy things. That's one of the issues in big companies sometimes is, you get slow, right? Because
Hmm.
you know when you make a decision, there's all of a sudden there's like six extra zeros on the other side of that number because of the scale. And I used to always say I don't want to see the last six zeros on a decision, because then you get paralyzed.
Right.
And but a lot of it was, and as you're a customer of McDonald's back then, it's like, I'll give you a couple of very simple examples. The number one complaint we had were mothers saying, I bring my kids to buy them a Happy Meal. They want chicken McNuggets, and it's got mystery meat in it. I don't know what's in it. That
Uh-huh.
was the number one complaint.
Right.
So I went to the product team and said, make them all white nuggets. Oh, it's going to cost too much. I said, figure it out. How much is it going to cost? It was like 10 cents more for a 4-piece nugget, versus what it was. I said, I don't need any research. Let's do in the test kitchen a bunch of trial around the right, white meat nuggets, put them in, raise the price 10 cents, and go. Right. So so it was those type of decisions, and you would say, well, it wasn't risky. It was the number one complaint for like the
Right.
last 10 years. And something simple. The second one that was really simple like that was coffee. The coffee, we had 60, 70 different types of brews around the country. This country's not that different, except for maybe, Seattle.
Right.
They like that really dark stuff.
Yeah.
And we had also, over a period of a bunch of years, taken a tenth of a tenth of a tenth of cost out of the foam cup every year. So the cup was kind of flimsy. You had a lid, the old lids back then that you couldn't reclose. You had to tear off the piece. I mean, it was bad coffee, whatever. And then you looked at the data. We used to sell $120,000 worth of coffee a year, had gone down to 36,000.
Oh,
Customers
wow.
tell it.
Yeah.
The customers, we sold in a breakfast meal, we sold more Coke than we sold coffee, because people just weren't buying the coffee because it was so
Yeah.
bad. So we changed the coffee. We changed the cup, changed the coffee, one brew. That's it. Make sure with that one we tested, and I'm not sure what it sells today, but I know it within a couple of years it doubled the volume of coffee again.
Well, they have
we're
the McCafe now. So
right, and so that came after that. First,
uh-huh.
before you could go,
Sure.
because all the young kids drink is cold coffee.
Right.
Right. That was the case. That was a trend already.
Mm-hmm.
And so you had to get there, but you don't have any credibility if your hot coffee is bad. And so you had to first, again, fix the foundation, then you can grow the brand from it.
Yeah. So as I was listening to you, I'm thinking about how important data is, but then not only how important data is, it's what you do with that data, right? Whether it's you're looking at your external customers of how you can improve their experience or the product that you're delivering, or your internal customers or your employees' satisfaction of what's going on with them. You've really got to listen to the data and you've got to do something with it.
Yeah. And I would tell you also in distributed systems. So, McDonald's, right? You have a restaurant manager, and then the supervisor who oversees, 7 or 8 restaurants, and then someone above that and above that. Everybody's got to have the same data.
Mm.
So people like to keep data because it's power.
Mm-hmm.
My belief is you can't. You have to share that data all the way down. So when I tell someone you used to sell $120,000 per restaurant of coffee and now you sell 36, hard to argue that, right? But you have to share that all the way down,
Mm-hmm.
and get rid of data that doesn't matter, right? Because there's way too much information, and usually, there's probably 8 or 10, key items that you have to pay attention to, and if you pay attention to those, the rest, kind of follow behind that.
Yeah. What would you say is what separates because you've worked with a lot of different leaders, a lot of incredible leaders, I'm sure. What separates the good leaders from the great leaders?
Listening.
Mm.
I say being in constant learning mode, no matter what.
Mm.
I've worked with some great leaders. That's one of the beauties of being on large company boards is you're not only seeing the leadership of that company, but your fellow board members are all CEOs or CFOs or other top executives of other companies. And so, for sure, kind of humble leaders that listen. It's not about them; it's about the brand or the company. To me, that's what I look for.
Hmm. Hmm. So, as we're kind of getting towards the end here, just got a couple more questions. Um, One is, if you, as you reflect back on your career, and obviously it's been an incredible career, um, you know, if you had to do anything differently, would you do anything differently?
I of course I would. What
Mhm.
I tell you, probably what I would have done uh, differently is if I was going to be in the restaurant business, I would have tried getting into McDonald's earlier. Even though I tried, I didn't really, go at it 100%.
Mhm.
And only because what happened, Burger King was owned by Pillsbury. And so when I was at Burger King, I thought that was the best brand in the world. But the reality is they didn't control their own destiny. You know, they were owned by Pillsbury. Eventually, Pillsbury got bought out. Burger King's gone like through 20 sales since then. The strong foundation wasn't there. Wendy's was when I was there, it was great. It was a small company going through a turnaround, and so it was great learning. So that I wouldn't change,
Mhm.
uh, but it wasn't a place to if I wanted to really be successful in this business, I had to be with the one that was, and especially the one that was driving international growth.
Right. Right.
Because we didn't talk much about that, but that was my favorite times at McDonald's were my trips, with young management in foreign countries, Poland. It's like here's a country that you know they probably have 800 restaurants now. It was 200 then, and everybody was hungry that worked on that management team.
Mm.
In fact, the general manager of the company was a physics major in college, right? But this was just a great job. That's it. So you had, and that's the same way. Japan, you know, we had 4,000 restaurants in Japan. It's crazy, and but to be able to work with the challenges of every different country and with people that have a different culture, and to be able to make sure that you fit within that to be part of their team to help it succeed, that to me is the most rewarding part of work.
Yeah, for sure. So I want to circle it all the way back to your childhood, Miami, your career. Does does it, because you're doing it? I mean, I guess I would ask is, do you get? You're very humble, but at the same time, do you recognize um, what you've done? And just think it's an incredibly inspiring story for those that might be younger that are facing hurdles or facing obstacles in life. That if you listen to your story and you listen to this podcast and listen to the things you overcame and the risks you took, um, these great things can happen. You can have these incredible experiences about traveling all over the world and working with incredible leaders and setting up restaurants in places that never have had them before. Does it all kind of sink in of what you've accomplished?
No, I think what I'm most proud of
Hmm.
is the friendships I still have. I mean, going back to high school, you keep those friendships, the people that I know that I made a positive influence on, and they made a positive influence on me. That's to me what keeps me grounded. It's my greatest satisfaction
Hmm.
is seeing the folks. that you work with, especially the younger folks that you were able to help, along the way, and seeing them succeed afterwards is what's the greatest satisfaction. It's not the money you accumulate or whatever. It's really the experiences and the friendships are the two things that I value most.
Yeah. So if this podcast does find its way into a younger listener's uh, iPhone or whatever wherever they're listening, one last piece of advice for them as they're making their way in this world that we're in today.
I mean, I always be in learning mode. Curiosity. Don't be afraid to take a risk. You don't have to follow. I always say university education is more about you growing at a time of independence, out of a structured high school environment. It isn't, your major doesn't necessarily have to be what you follow.
Right.
I think, and I see that all the time. I mean, I see a lot of attorneys that run businesses, right? They're not attorneys anymore, et cetera. And so, don't be afraid to go a little bit here or there. I would say be financially astute at home. I always believed in, maybe it's a little bit the immigrant mentality is you don't spend what you make. You spend less than what you make, so that you've got that rainy day funds. It allows you to take more risk. Believe me, when you know that, it's when the next paycheck isn't the one that's going to put food on the table. And so those are the pieces. And again, value your family and your friends, right? So I always say the work can't be the North Star. It's got to be friendships and family. It has to be the North Star.
Yeah. Well, I've learned a lot today, Raul. I really appreciate the time. If anything that I've taken out of this is, calculated risk are really important when the timing is right. And yes, it might be some risk there, but you got to take it in order to accomplish great things. I learned about the data, about how you've got to do something with the data, and the data needs to be the same all the way across the board. Learn to listen. Yeah. We gotta listen, right? And
I'll tell you one there.
Yeah.
I always told my team members, you can't wait for 100% of the facts to make a decision. You're late then. In business, give me 70, 75% and run. And if you make a mistake, just fix it fast.
Yeah, for sure.
Entrepreneurs don't wait for 100% of the data to come in. Innovators don't wait for 100% of the data to come in. They don't go with zero data, right? You just don't go with intuition. You need more than just intuition. But that's one of the pieces I always believed in is that, speed to market is really important. Perfection, not so much.
Right. Well, I really appreciate the time, Raul. This has been great catching up with you, and just congratulations on an incredible career. I always enjoy spending time with you, and I hope you can join us again soon.
All right. Thanks, Keith.
Thank
really
you.
Appreciate it.